So what I'd like to do today is I would like to sort of review some fundamental concepts, especially regarding modularization, but also the fact that we can actually access a method from another class in another method just by adding a prefix, which would be the name of the class. And I'm going to show that by sort of working through two small applications here. One would be the add numbers, and one would be the simple calculator application. And so for the add numbers, what we're going to do is we're going to make three methods. Essentially, the goal is to take two numbers and add them, but in a modularized form. And so here we're going to make a method to get two numbers, and we're going to make another method which essentially adds those numbers, and we're going to make another method which will essentially print out the answer of the addition. And so here, we're just really working on one function of the calculator, but the idea is that all these methods should be accessible to the simple calculator when we create it. And so let's start out by actually creating the get number method. And so the get number method is nothing but a public static method which is going to return an integer. And so we're going to call it get number. And get number will actually, we're going to need a scanner because we're actually going to get the input from the user here. And when we do that, after we have the scanner present, we can ask for the number, and we can just say enter a number. And we can make it feasible such that they may actually enter the number. The variable has to exist for them to enter a variable, which is what line 26 essentially means. And then in order to sort of relay this back to the main method, we can just say return the number which they entered. And so by now, if we have two numbers, let's say number 1 and let's say number 2, they should be able to enter, or essentially they should be able to do everything which we've specified in the get number method. Here, in order to add those numbers, we'll create another method, and essentially this method will it will also be static, but it's not, and it's going to return an integer. It will be the addition of both of these numbers, and so we're going to call this add. It too is going to take, so this is going to take two numbers. I'll just call them int I and int j, although that's probably not good practice, but these are just placeholders for number 1 and number 2. So the add method essentially says you can enter any two integers, and what it's going to do is essentially it's going to return the addition of I and j. And so we can just specify do I and j and return that to the main method. And so that's what it does. And so adding these numbers is essentially, we can just say add, and then we can say that I and j is now number 1 and number 2 as parameters, and we're going to store that in something called an answer. And so otherwise it's just redundant, right? We're just returning back the addition of both these numbers, but we're not actually doing anything. So the idea is to store it in an answer so that we could sort of print out print out the answer. And so when we do this, we're allowed to enter two numbers and we can print out the answer, which is why we stored it in a variable called answer. However, recall that we actually want a method called print to take care of this particular functionality of printing. And so what we can do here is we can say, well, this is also going to be public. It's going to be static because it's not attached to an object. And instead of making it or double, we're essentially going to make it void because it's not going to return anything. It's just going to print something out. And so we can call this print. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say, well, you can pass in any integer. And if you pass in any integer into the print method, essentially what that's going to do is it's going to just print that integer out. Just like that. It's going to print that integer out. Or it's going to print any int out, rather. And so by now, instead of having a print line statement, what we can do is we can just say any int, and now it's waiting for an integer to be entered. Now, recall that we stored the addition, we stored the answer to the addition of number 1 and number 2 in an integer called answer. And so if we just do answer, then we should be able to sort of print out. So it says, it's giving me an error here. Let's see why. Right, because it's not called any int, it's called print. So I mean, this essentially allows me to sort of achieve this particular functionality here. And so the goal now is to sort of go into simple calculator and make a calculator which multiplies, divides, subtracts, and also adds. But we can get, if we want to get the numbers, then we're going to refer to the add numbers class. If we want to print out the answer, we're going to refer to the add numbers class. And so here, let's see. So I'm going to give the user a couple options. I'm going to say, well, you can press 1 to sort of add numbers, right? And I'm essentially going to repeat this here. So you can press 2 to subtract, okay? And you can press 3 to multiply, okay? And on top of that, you can sort of press 4 to divide, okay? And so essentially, I mean, I'm gonna again bring in a scanner because I need them to enter an option here. And so scanner data equals new scanner. It doesn't always have to be called data, but it could if you wanted it to, right? And so here, I'll make an int variable called option, and I'm going to equate it to the scanner such that they may be able to enter whatever they'd like, or one of these options. It'd probably be a good idea to make a constraint here that it must be 1 through 4, but we'll take care of that later. So by now, essentially, if their option is essentially 1, then I can sort of, what I'd like to do is I would like to make two variables. I'd like to make two variables which essentially get their input for two potential numbers which they could enter. And so what I could do is I could just go down and make a get number. I mean, that's what I want to do. I want to get a number. I could just make a get number method here at the bottom, maybe somewhere around here. But recall that I actually have a get number method already present. And so instead of sort of making it in this particular line of code or in this particular class, I could just refer to the add numbers class, which I already have here. And since the add numbers class has a public method for getting numbers, I'll just say get number. Okay, and I'll do this again just for because I have a second number here. Okay. Add numbers. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an answer here, and that answer will essentially be, well, think about it, right? It's going to be the addition of number 1 and number 2. I already have an add method here present, which essentially adds two numbers. So I should probably just refer to the add numbers class and then just call that function, which takes in two integers. And then by doing that, I'll be able to add those numbers. Now, of course, I'm not actually doing anything just yet. What I want to do is I want to print out the answer. And again, I have a print method which actually prints out an answer already. So I'll just print out the answer, which in this case would be the addition of both numbers. Now, it's giving me an error because I actually have to add a prefix, which is the add numbers class. It doesn't know that it's being derived from the add numbers class, and so you have to make that, you have to specify that. And so here I'm going to say, well, if it's option 2, then all I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to make these two variables. I'm going to make these two variables, and they're going to get a number from the add numbers class. That functionality is made possible through the add numbers class. And I'm going to store the answer. I'm not going to add them, right? Because if it's option 2, they're going to subtract. And so instead, what I'm going to do is, since I don't have this functionality available in the add numbers class, I guess I'm just going to make a public static int, which is going to return the subtraction of potential variables here. Okay, and I'm just going to return I minus j because that's what the subtract method is. And then for sort of multiplying, I'm going to call the method multiply, okay? And I'm going to essentially, instead of minusing I and j, I'm going to simply multiply them. And then again, for this one down here, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to essentially divide both of them. Now, I'm going to divide, so I'm going to work with doubles, right? And so I want to make that feasible with doubles. And I'm going to return I and j, which is going to return a double. And so now when I do option 2, I can just, instead of referring to add numbers, get number, I could just refer to, the subtraction of number 1 and number 2, and that's valid. And so now I guess I can't I can't refer to add numbers dot print answer. Well, I guess I could. Let's see here. Okay, so yeah, so here we're just getting the number, which is perfectly valid, and our answer is essentially going to be the subtraction of number 1 and number 2. And then I'm going to print out answer. And print derives from the add numbers class, and so I have to add that prefix there. Okay. And now, essentially, I guess this is valid, and so if I print this out, and if I were to say 2, I could say 2, and then it would ask me to enter 2 numbers. That should give me -1, which it does. Okay, and so now what I can do is I can say else if, and this one would essentially be for the multiply functionality here. And this one is also going to take these 2 numbers. It's going to get those 2 numbers, which again is made possible through the add numbers class. And then instead of subtracting, again, I want to have a variable called answer, and essentially it's going to store the multiplication of I and j, or rather number 1 and number 2. Okay. And then just because number 1 and number 2 is an integer, so it's actually giving me an error here. So it seems like I spelled multiply wrong down here. So now since multiply, the method multiply is returning an integer, and I know that my print method, which sort of derives from the add numbers class, is valid for an integer, I can just sort of put an integer in there and I shouldn't get any problems. That works perfectly fine. Now, what I can do now is I can specify option 3, right? And option 3 is option 4 rather. Option 4 is nothing but, again, having 2 numbers here. So it's having 2 numbers, and what it's going to do now is it will essentially, I'm going to have an answer, but it's going to be a double, and so I'm going to store it in a double. It's going to be called divide, and I'm going to divide number 2 by number 1 by number 2. And then I can't really call the add numbers print answer, because this is only valid for integers. So maybe if I go back and I make like another public static void print, and then instead what I'm going to do here is I'm going to print out any double, okay, because I'm sort of overloading my methods here. I'm not only making it applicable, I'm not only making print apply for a integer, but I'm also making it apply for a double. And so just as I printed out a integer, in this case I'll just go ahead and print out any double, okay, that the user sort of enters into this this parameter here, this formal parameter. So if their actual parameter is a double, then it'll just print it out, which it does. So let's see in here. If I were to say 4, I could do, well, let me do something which I know the answer to, right? So if I were to say 4, then I could do 4 divided by 2, which would give me 2. And so, I mean, that returns what I would like, And so, yeah, and so that's really the basics of, but what I want to do is I also want to add a sort of a print line statement which says press 5 to exit. And so this whole entire thing is going to keep executing until they press 5. So it's going to essentially do this entire block of code while their option does not equal 5. Okay, and so if it does equal 5, it's going to jump out of the loop, and we'll just print out program ended, right? Okay. So we'll just say, let's say I wanted to multiply two numbers. Well, I just 5 and 2, and it gives me 10. And then it asks me to enter a number again because it's giving me the menu. Actually, it's not giving me the menu. I don't think it's not giving me the menu. And so perhaps my do while loop is sort of not where it should be, right? It should give me the menu again and again. And so if I increase the length of my do while or my do, then that'll sort of encompass. So I am getting an error while option does not equal to 5. So essentially what's happening now is that the do while block, if we see what it encompasses, the do while essentially starts from, okay, so it starts from here and then it ends right here. Okay, and the option variable exists only in the do while, right? Because that's where it is between these two blocks, but it doesn't exist outside the do while. And I'm saying option should not equal 5 outside the do while. And so option doesn't exist outside the do while, it only exists inside the do while. And so what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to declare option sort of outside the do while, and then I would initialize it inside the do while, which is fine, but and so it exists both inside and out because this is a class level variable, right? And so it's all about scope. And so essentially option just goes out of scope. And so if it's not, so now option and this option, which are the same option, are now on the same playing field, so to speak. And so this works. And so now it should give me the menu as well. And so if I say I wanted to multiply and I say 2, 3, it should give me the answer, which it does. And then it gives me the menu again. And so if I say 5, it says the program ended.